Hello. So I'd love to talk to you about organizational transformation, and I find this topic particularly interesting because organizational transformation means different things to different people, and I hope this presentation can propose some of the more helpful tools that can help you see transformation through successfully. Sometimes I'll interchange the words transformation and change, and they do mean very different things, but that's for a later video. So, hello, I'm Simon. I like complex problems and cats, and thank you for having me. So what I'd like to talk about is why transformation typically fails, because I think that sets the scene for what comes next, which is an alternative approach, a thinking tool that can help us succeed. And then, although this is a video, there's a mirror space that you can use to have a go at organizational change yourself. And here you can see I've interchanged the words transformation and change. Apologies. Right, so I want to start more abstract and I promise I'll get more concrete. So on the video you're watching, there's two different systems here. System A on the left and System B on the right. And this is coming directly from The Choice, which is a very good book I really recommend, from Eli Goldratt. So the question I want to ask is, which of these two systems is more complex? On the left-hand side we have a system with 4 discrete, independent elements. On the right-hand side, if I'm counting correctly, we have a system with 9 interdependent, interrelated elements. And yes, so the question here is, which system is more complex? You can pause the video here. I'm also going to pause for a few seconds to give you time to think. And the results are in. Regardless of what you choose, you're correct, because it all depends on how you define the word complex. And Eli Goldratt does this in a really interesting way. So the typical definition of complexity, one that we tend to go by, at least I went by until I read that book, is how easy is it to describe the system? How many data elements, how many sentences do I need? Because if that is the definition of complexity, then the right-hand side, to describe all those arrows, all those dependencies, all those circles, is definitely hard to describe and would require more sentences. However, there is another definition of complex, and that's more helpful to us. And in this situation, as scientists, managers, and consultants, we are interested in the definition of, the difficulty of controlling and predicting the behavior of a system, especially when we introduce change. And so for us, the more degrees of freedom the system has, the more complex it is. And in this case, System A is more complex, because the minimum number of elements I have to touch in order to impact the system as a whole is 4. Whereas on the right-hand side, System B, I just need to impact this one element to impact the whole system. This is quite abstract, but I hope as we go through this presentation, we kind of will link back to this in a number of different ways. Let's start here. I think this will probably immediately link back to the previous example. So I want to make 3 assertions before we begin. The first assertion is that every organization has obstacles to tackle, and this is normal. Organizations are growing. What any organization is doing today is very slightly different to what it did yesterday, which is probably radically different to what it did when it was initially started, when it had a different number of people, different composure of people, different products, different customers, different shareholders, maybe no shareholders, and now maybe lots. So every organization has obstacles to tackle. As a result of growth, as a result of change, obstacles emerge. That's normal. The second assertion is that every organization has limited resources. Call that time, effort, money. Every organization has limited resources. And there's a third assertion here, which, if we look at these 2 assertions first in isolation, it's quite scary. If all organizations have obstacles to tackle, but there's only limited resources, there's a bit of a disconnect, a bit of a concern about how we can use limited resources to tackle many obstacles, especially obstacles that will continue to emerge over time. And this is where the third assertion comes in, which is that most, if not all, obstacles stem from the same underlying cause. What I mean by this is that if we follow the reason behind the obstacles we see in our organizations today, logic suggests they stem from a few if not sometimes, a single underlying cause. And the great thing is if we can find that and eliminate it, we remove all obstacles with less resources than if we're trying to tackle the obstacles directly. And we'll probably be more effective. And we'll see why in a second. But I realize that is a strong assertion. But I'll give you some examples, and this is nothing that I can ask you to believe. It's something that hopefully you can investigate and observe over time and see if it is an assertion that works well for you. So an analogy here, just to make sure I've explained this correctly, is that doctors don't analyze and treat each symptom in isolation. They diagnose and treat the underlying cause. They find where all these symptoms, or obstacles as I call them in the previous slide, are coming from. And they kind of triangulate and treat it. And whereas when we look at big change programs, often they look at all the obstacles, all the pains a business has, and they try to tackle each one in isolation. And there's often tens or hundreds of projects to do that. And that's no one's fault. That's how we actually taught to do things when it comes to change. And I just want to paint that picture once more in a slightly different way to make sure I'm giving you a clear picture. So if you imagine an organization with 3 symptoms, A, B, and C, but let's just name those symptoms, make them specific. We may be seeing increasing staff attrition, slowing project delivery, growing operational costs. Often big change programs focus here, with many projects, limited negative impact. Through no fault of their own, that's how we're taught to tackle problems. Whereas I believe, and doctors believe, that we can focus down here. That there's a few causes behind many symptoms, obstacles, and if we can find it and target it, we can have greater impact with less effort. And Russell Acuff puts this nicely. He says, "We do not try to cure a headache by brain surgery, but by putting a pill in the stomach." If we understand a system such as the human body, we can recognize that often the most effective treatment may not be local to the symptom, might be quite far removed. And when we're operating in teams, we often see, particularly in technology teams, at least that's where my experience is, often some of the constraints, the obstacles that a technology team faces come from deeper within the organization, through rules, policies, and processes that the technology team doesn't have any ability to affect itself. So the problem, the obstacle, is often far removed from the cause. So how can we be more like doctors? Is the question. If this is all true, if we believe those 3 assertions, limited resources, obstacles to remove, common cause underneath, how can we try that out? How can we find the common cause behind obstacles and tackle that rather than obstacles themselves? Well, I want to talk through an example. Let's just get straight into something tangible now, where we were able to exercise this, and this is credit to Engineer Better. I was very fortunate to work alongside them, learn from them, and we used this tooling, which I'll explain in a second, as a way of understanding the common cause, the common underlying cause, the thing to be tackled that will remove all obstacles in one swoop. And sometimes it can be one, sometimes it can be a few, but it tends to be much less than the number of obstacles, so we can take less of our limited organizational resources through change. So this was a utility provider a few years ago. So they had a program aimed at reducing annual customer servicing costs, and they were doing this through digital transformation, through rewriting their systems, so that the systems could operate with lower total operating costs. And there were 2 players involved here. There was internal software development teams that were nascent teams that were just forming, and there was an outsourcer who was there to help kickstart the process, get things moving, start writing the software, start designing the systems, but also the processes that they would use to deliver the systems. And over time, they would hand over work to the internal development teams as those development teams gained experience. Our focus was the platform team, and this the name maybe that name can mean a few different things. So in this case, the platform team was responsible for manual deployments, and so taking things developers had written and putting it into production or live, and helping move the organization to a continuous delivery model where developers could self-serve. They could perform deployments themselves without the need for this platform team to do it for them. They'd also deal with any instance relating to environments in production and a few other things, but this was their main focus. Deploy to production and allow developers in the future to deploy to production themselves. And I started by coaching before realizing the issues ran deeper, so I made my own mistake, as we'll see in a second. So the way to read this diagram, and this is a thinking tool, it's called the current reality tree. It comes from Eli Goldratt's theory of constraints, which is an incredibly helpful system of tools that I highly recommend. So this current reality tree is basically a causal diagram, an if-then diagram. So the way to read it is an arrow means if-then. So if I drink lots of water, then I will need the bathroom. And sorry, I couldn't think of a better example. And then a circle is an and clause. So if I am outside and it is raining, only then, only if those two things are true, I will get wet. So now you're experts. Let me jump straight into the diagram. So these things here were, whatever you want to call them, obstacles, symptoms, that you could see as soon as you walked into the organization if you observed some of the meetings. So the platform team themselves in the top left, they could not come to an agreement easily. Work was piling up for them. During meetings, their engagement was low. They were playing with their phones. They were frustrated. They were arguing with each other. They were hesitating to pick up work. They were feeling frustrated and demotivated. There's a high volume of incidents being raised in production. And the program as a whole, I wasn't sure if it was going to be able to achieve its strategic goal of reducing the annual customer servicing costs. And one thing I do want to point out very, very clearly at the very beginning is the platform team, the fact that they were behaving this way was no indication of them as individuals, as we'll see shortly. But they were incredible individuals, and the way they were behaving was not due to them and their individual personalities. It was due to something deeper. So I have great respect for them, and I need to call that out early and often. And we'll see why they were behaving the way they were. So already, if we just start to look at these at face value, we can already start to see some cause and effect linkage between these things. So for example, if the platform team hesitates to pick up work, well, work's going to pile up. And if work piles up, that might be one reason why the team as a whole feel frustrated and demotivated, looking at this huge backlog that's just growing. And if that is the case, the platform team engagement during meetings is probably going to be low. And that might be one reason why they can't come to an agreement, and it might be one reason why work is piling up. So there's already a downward spiral here, just at face value, that we can see before going any deeper. This is a simplified diagram. It's missing out some of the deeper elements, but it summarizes things quite nicely and shows you some hopefully interesting things. So from talking to some other teams involved, I could start to delve a little bit deeper. The neighboring teams had a lot of context that helped me add to this diagram. So, for example, we learned that the outsourcer contract was fixed scope, fixed time, fixed price. So the people who were doing the work, who were adding to this new customer servicing software for sending out bills, etc., were engaged in a way that was fixed scope, fixed time, fixed price, the iron triangle. And we're also seeing that that wasn't just the case. Each release was also undergoing scope creep. So it wasn't fixed scope, it was growing scope, fixed time, fixed price. And those two things together meant that the outsourcer, the only thing they could do to achieve their deadlines, which they needed to achieve in order to be paid, was to vary quality. No fault of their own. If that is the case, and work is given to the outsourcer, then they're going to be incentivized to cut corners. And if they're incentivized to cut corners, and new releases need to take place, regardless of quality of bugs, because if they don't, the outsourcer won't be paid, then software with defects is going to go live, and we're going to have a high volume of incidents. And if root cause analysis takes time, and the platform team have limited time and headcount, and they're the people responsible for looking at a number of these issues, it's another reason why work for the platform team will pile up. Also, if we add another two factor, if the outsourcer makes technology decisions and automation requires upfront investment and the outsourcer is incentivized to cut corner, those three things together mean that technology choices will not have been made with automation in mind, because they're trying to take the shortest route from A to B, and automation wasn't something that was important at that time. And what that means is, if technology choices have been made without automation in mind, and full automation is difficult to achieve unless designed into the architecture from day one, then continuous delivery is not possible. At least not easily, not without a lot of thought. And if that is the case, and if we bring in something else here, that automation is needed to achieve affordable quality at scale and at speed, well, then as the software grows, costs will grow. And that is one reason why the strategy, the program of work to reduce annual customer servicing costs may not be successful, because we're creating new software, and as that software grows, costs will grow, and as costs grow, we're reducing our ability to meet our objective of reducing annual customer servicing cost per customer. Also, if continuous delivery is not possible, and in the absence of that automation, the platform team are needing to perform those steps manually through ClickOps, then manual work is going to take time. And if manual work takes time, it's another reason why work for the platform team piles up. Also, the platform team focus will now shift more to manual operations, ClickOps versus automation, and the platform team are automation engineers, then they're not going to be able to grow the skills that matter to them. And this comes from intrinsic motivation, mastery, purpose, autonomy. They're lacking mastery. They can't develop mastery in the areas that are important to them as automation engineers. And that's probably why they're feeling frustrated, demotivated, and probably why they hesitate to pick up work. The work on the table is ClickOps work, and they're automation engineers. The two things don't quite fit. Also, if the platform team are yet to develop trust with each other, they were a new team formed maybe 1 month before I visited them, and they're already feeling frustrated and demotivated, then they're probably more likely to misunderstand each other. And over time, misunderstandings further reduce trust, and that means that they're going to feel more and more frustrated and demotivated with time unless we intervene and help them. And at some point, that might bubble up to individuals leaving the organization. And that means the organization doesn't possess the skills necessary to automate. And that is another reason reinforcing why continuous delivery is not possible, and why the program may be less successful at reducing annual customer servicing costs. Eventually, if enough people leave the organization, the reputation of the organization will be damaged. And this was a small town, so news would spread, and Glassdoor has a good way of spreading news. And what that means that the cost of hiring and retention increases. We may turn to more money. We may turn to we may need to have more interviews to hire any one person. But it increases. It's harder. And when we lose people, it's a 30% cost. And so another reason why it's hard to achieve the customer servicing cost objectives, because we're now paying a lot for our people as well. And also then if the cost of hiring and retention increases, it's going to be harder to attract talent with the necessary skills, as I suggested. And that means, well, the only people we can turn to if we aren't able to grow our own, have our own automation engineers, is turn to our outsourcers. And if work's given to the outsourcers, and they're incentivized to cut corners because of the fixed scope, fixed time, fixed price contract, then it will just reinforce their entire loop. Where new releases will take place regardless of quality or bugs, and we'll continue to make decisions that take us further away from continuous delivery and further away from the strategic objectives. And if we go on here, we know that people will leave, and again, it'll take us further away from our objectives. So a question I would ask, if this is interactive, is where do you think improvement efforts should focus? Again, pause if you'd like. I think my color coding is probably giving things away here, but one area is, ideally if we have full autonomy in this organization and we can walk anywhere, and hopefully this diagram can give influence because it's logical, it's visual, it allows people to scrutinize it, which is one of the power of the theory of constraints and this diagram, the current reality tree. And so here, a root cause, something that seems to be leading to everything, is the type of contract that we have with our outsourcer. And even if we're just within the platform team, we may not be able to affect this directly, but by hopefully showing our thinking, it means it can be scrutinized, and with time it can be believed in. And so people even outside of who have influence and control in this area, who may be outside of your team, can start to help see how they can improve the organization, not just for the benefit of the platform team, but for the benefit of the strategic objectives. So what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is, if you have full control in this system, in this organization, yes, let's look at how we can do a slightly different contract here to allow outsourcers to do good work. But if we don't, there's other things that we can look at. If we're just within the platform team, we may look at how can we influence architectural decisions. That might be a neighboring area to play. That may help at least stem some of the problems that we're facing and allow us to become more of the more automation engineers that we are. Now, question, what strikes you about the behaviors of the individuals? I'm going to take a breath in case you want to pause, in case you want to have a think. But what strikes me here is they're behaving perfectly rationally. I fully understand why they're frustrated, demotivated. I fully understand why they may be disengaged during meetings. This is not the work that they signed up to do. They cannot pursue mastery. They cannot grow the skills. They cannot become more marketable. They're clicking buttons all day. It's not their fault. How can we change the system to help them do what they do best? Because that will help us as an organization achieve our objective. What else comes up for you? So yes, focus here, if possible. If not, this tool can be a way of influencing people, helping people see the problem, see the wood for the cheese, and be able to gravitate towards the root cause themselves. People will have more influence than you, perhaps. And also, if not, it helps us understand. We can draw a circle around where our influence is, and a place to play might be around the technology choices. Maybe that's something we can affect as a platform team. And so Jez Humble puts this very well. I think it says Jez Humble and a few different authors. It comes from Lean Enterprise. As organizations grow, they move into the complex domain, and at that point, nobody can hope to understand more than a small part of the whole. And this current reality tree is a nice way of starting to understand a bit more of the whole. And although every model is wrong, some are helpful. This isn't modeling complexity in its perfect form. It's not complexity science or complexity simulation, but it helps us understand just enough to know where to focus our efforts. If we try to tackle any of these things in isolation, if we held motivation days for individuals, if we paid them more, it may help for a very short period of time, but it won't solve the issue, and eventually we'll see the same effects reoccurring. Right, so there's another example here. So this for no good reason, this is another utility provider. There's nothing wrong with utility providers, it just happens to be one that had some very interesting obstacles that is worth talking about, because it taught me a lot. So firstly, this utility provider was facing reducing profit margins for their residential customers following a customer price cap change. And as a result, what they did in response to this, which is logical, coherent, is focus on return on investment as the main measure of success for all work across the organization. So they could focus on the work with the highest return on investment, and that is very logical. And I would make the same choice in the same situation at this point. In this case, IT was a centralized function, this utility provider with a fixed budget, and every quarter the business teams would submit IT project requests to the centralized IT function, who would then prioritize all those projects based on return on investment and just take those projects with the highest return on investment forward, because they have limited budget. So I think at the end of the day, they could only service about 70% of the projects, so 30% of the projects never move forward. But they made sure they focus on 70% with the highest return on investment. I think that's the full story. So again, oh no, one more. So it's just worth noting that IT operations was handled by IT outsourcers. So they were handling things like server provisioning requests, those kind of things. Sorry, so let's jump in. And this is actually on a Mirrorboard. So I'm going to jump over to the Mirrorboard. Wonderful. And I'll tell you the story. So the primary business goal is near-term cost savings. Let's go right first. So if the primary business goal is near-term cost savings, and the outsourcer is seen as a significant cost, and outsourcers, for reasons we'll look at in a second, cannot reduce headcount, all they can really do is face pressure to reduce day rates. They can't reduce the number of people they have on the pitch. So all they can do is, to save costs, is to reduce day rates. But outsourcers are a business themselves, and they need to remain profitable. They need to stay in business to preserve their employees and satisfy their shareholders, etc. And so all they could do to maintain the margin whilst reducing the day rates is to cycle in more junior talent in place of experienced talent. There's two things that happen here. Firstly, if that is the case, if the outsourcers cycle in junior talent in place of experienced talent, and automation requires the experienced talent that's being cycled out, the outsourcers who are running an IT operations function cannot automate repetitive tasks, which means that they cannot reduce their headcount. They need the number of people they need because they cannot reduce the work. They cannot automate the work away. And that puts them in the same situation when this next happens, where the outsourcer is seen as a significant cost and the primary business goal is near-term cost savings. They can't reduce the headcount because we can't automate away repetitive work. So they face even more pressure to reduce day rates again, and the cycle continues. But what is the effect of that cycle? Let's look at that. So also, if outsourcers cycle in junior talent in place of experienced talent, and junior talent is more likely to make mistakes through no fault of their own, they're new to this context, and they may be more new to the technologies, then significant tickets coming to IT operations are going to be serviced late or serviced incorrectly. No one's fault. And that leads to two things. Firstly, if that is the case, and correcting mistakes takes time and money, particularly as these are consultants, it's one reason why IT costs will increase. But also, if significant tickets are serviced late or incorrectly, then delayed tickets lead to delayed projects. And if that is the case, and delayed projects incur costs because people are waiting, and we have deferred revenue from those projects, then IT costs are increasing. And business revenues might be reducing or delayed. So that's one side. There's two other ways I want to go in this diagram to give you the full story. So also the primary business goal is near-term cost savings, and employees are seen as a significant cost, rightly or wrongly. There is going to be a focus on reducing employee headcount. And if that is the case, and workload in the business teams is actually increasing, then the business teams need to do more work with less people. And that's a difficult position to be in. If that is the case, and automation allows us to do more work with less people, as long as we automate the right processes, then business teams must automate their work. Let's pause there, because there's another bit of the technology, another piece of the diagram I need to get to continue. But let's just remember that business teams need to automate their work in the face of reducing headcount and growing work. So again, if primary business goal is near-term cost savings, and maximizing return on investment will unlock cost savings, then IT projects are going to be prioritized based on return on investment, because that allows us to achieve our primary business goal. That leads, you can see, leads to four things here. So if IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment, let's go to the right first, and there's limited budget available to IT, then some business areas will not have their IT projects completed. And as we said, this is around 30% of projects not being taken through because they're just limited budget. But if that is the case, and there's this pressure, business teams must automate their work in the face of reducing headcount, growing work, all the business can do is automate their own tactical tools. Create their own tactical tools using VBA, Excel, whatever's available. If that is the case, and there are many business teams with similar problems, maybe who don't know each other because this was a complex organization, then what we're going to have is we're going to have many tactical tools emerging for solving similar problems, shadow IT. If that is the case and maintaining each tool comes at a cost, there's going to be significant cost to maintain duplicate tools across many different teams. And this could be, depending on how you count it, it could be IT costs are increasing, it could be referred elsewhere, but it could come under the line item of IT costs. And to some degree it did here, because IT were then asked to come and fix these tools. Right. So let's explore another path. I think there's three more paths here that we haven't explored, and then we're done. So if IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment, let's go this way first. This was interesting. Then projects must be scoped and analyzed to calculate what is the return on investment, because otherwise we can't prioritize. And if that is the case and there is limited budget available, then significant projects are going to be scoped and analysed but never taken forward, and that's the 30%. If that is the case, and scoping and analysing projects consumes significant effort and therefore cost, IT costs are increasing. And I believe they had dedicated teams to, at least for part of their time, calculating the return on investment of these projects. So 30% of projects not moving forward after quite a lot of scoping and analysing is quite a lot of effort that could be spent elsewhere, directly contributing to business goals. So we lost those preventable work there. IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment. Two other things. Let me talk about the less interesting one first, and then, at least for me, and then a more interesting one for me. It was more of a staggering find, something that was new to me. If IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment and bundling several changes into one project increases returns, then the business are going to bundle changes together. They're incentivized to, because that means every project has a higher return. It offers more. And if larger projects are more complex and therefore more prone to delays because they're harder to estimate, then projects will generally come in after when we estimate it, because estimating bigger things is harder for us, at least for me as a human being. And if projects are delayed, and the business is sensitive to project delays, or leadership is sensitive to project delays, then over time business confidence in IT may be reduced, and leadership may redouble their focus on reducing costs, which brings us back down to here, the primary business goals, near-term cost savings. So it reinforces that focus and reinforces all these things that we're seeing. The final route here, which I find the most interesting and taught me the most, is that if IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment and technical shortcuts improve return on investment, then each project increases the complexity of the IT landscape. Now let me just break that down. If the business knows that they need a high return on investment figure to get their project prioritized, what they might do is they might request IT to find as many shortcuts as possible to deliver their project. But what that means is when that project is delivered, it actually complicates or complexifies the IT estate. It makes it more knotty and harder to work out how to then build on top of, in my simple language. And so that means that the next project that comes along is going to take longer for the technical analysis, and it's going to take longer to implement because we're building on less solid foundations. So every project is actually increasing the complexity of the IT landscape. And that means that if that is the case, and integrating with a complex IT landscape takes more effort in terms of analysis and development, project costs are slowly going to go up over time because our return on investment target or measure of success is encouraging us to reduce the investment needed for every project, which is complicating the technical implementation and making each subsequent project more complex in terms of technical implementation as a result. Sorry, that was a lot of words. So if project costs are increasing, that means IT costs are increasing for another reason. And if IT costs are increasing, it's another reason why business confidence in IT may be reduced and leadership redouble their focus on reducing costs, and again reinforcing downward spiral, primary business goals, near-term cost savings. And that was a staggering find for me. I can understand it's very logical to focus on cost savings. It feels right, and I would have done the same thing without knowing what I knew as a result of understanding their organization. So I learned a lot from this, and I was grateful for that. I hope a lot of this may be very intuitive for you, and that's a good thing. If not, I hope it helps. So that's another current reality tree in action. Helps us understand where to focus. Ooh, just flipping back. We need to think about the target we've set, because the target we've set is leading to, indirectly or directly in some cases, to all of the obstacles that we're facing in green here. And so if we can try and tweak our target, or find another way of, another approach that would encourage the behaviors that we need, we can eradicate all these obstacles in one go rather than trying to tackle them in isolation. Because tackling them in isolation will use a lot of resources, and as we can start to see from where those obstacles are coming from, it probably would have limited, if not negative, impact. Right. So I think I've given you the answer to this one. But of course, as we discussed, it depends on your sphere of influence, where you are in the organization and what you can affect. These tools can help increase your sphere of influence through helping other people understand what you see. We talked about this. And so yeah, Eli Goldratt, the originator of the theory of constraints, Tell me how you'll measure me, and I will tell you how I behave. That's exactly what we saw with return on investment as a measure. And we saw illogical behavior as a result. And there's lots of other interesting examples of this. I think I don't know if it might be fictitious, it might be a fictional, enjoyable tale, but the Cobra effect is another nice example of this. What else comes up for you? If you're in the room, I would love to know. Otherwise, you could email me at OpenCredo, simon.copsey@opencredo.com. Anything that comes up for you, I would love to learn from you. Right, so there's an exercise here. We obviously can't do it together, but there's a URL here that I hope is accessible to you. You've seen the clarity that thinking in terms of cause and effect can provide. Let me say that again more clearly. So cause and effect thinking can help us see the inherent simplicity in complex situations. And this Mirrorboard is a way of you exercising that. What I've done on this Mirrorboard, let me open it. What you'll see on this board is, you'll see that there's a number of obstacles here. And what I'd love you to do is I'd love you to try and stitch these together in terms of cause and effect, using arrows and circles if you wish. If you want a reminder, I think, yeah, here we go. We have an example of the one that we had earlier on, of how you can stitch these things together using arrows and circles, what they mean. So if, then, and. And we've got a few examples here that have already been worked on. But yeah, so what could lead to what? So if staff are demotivated, maybe I think that might lead to attrition. I actually know this example, but I can't remember the answer. It's but there is no one answer, and I'm robbing you of the context of the organisation. So it is difficult, and these things are, as a result, more interesting in pairs. So the way that we generally find these obstacles that need to be tackled, and the way that we tend to put these trees together, and it can be done in multiple ways, but the way that we get the context of the organisation to understand the cause and effect chains is through interviews, through discussions, curiosity, and through that we can start to map these things together, and we can actually then start to play it back to individuals for scrutiny, because this is a logical and visual tool. That means that I can play it back like I have done to you. To people in the organisation, they can tell me where I'm wrong, and through understanding where I'm wrong, we can make it better. And the model's never perfect, but the model's always good enough to help us find where to focus our efforts right now. And it might be one thing, it might be a few things, but generally less than the number of obstacles that we're seeing. We should see it thinning out as we go to the bottom of the diagram. And that means less resources, more impact, as you already know it's from this presentation. But that's how we do it, and that's how the theory of constraints helps us achieve it. Thank you, Eli Goldratt. So please have a go. I will, after this presentation, make sure that's a public Mirrorboard. If not, that it's replaced with one so you can have a go yourself. Oh, I'm going to skip past that. There's one possible solution. You can always flick back to that if you'd like. So the key points, there's more key points, but here's a few. Cause and effect thinking allows us to see the simplicity behind complex problems, behind complex situations, and organizations are complex, as Jez Humble eloquently put. No one person can see the whole. And so these cause and effect diagrams, these current reality trees, can help us link things together that we otherwise wouldn't be able to link, and see relationships that we didn't think existed, so we can understand the impact any action is having, and we can find a leverage point, one element in the system that we can touch, like in system B, that can have systematic impact. Systemic impact actually would be the right term. Seeing the simplicity helps us find simple solutions that focus on the root cause, and everyone else remembers some models are helpful. I think that's the third time I've said it. Learn more. So these, It's Not Luck is a wonderful business novel by Eli Goldratt, which is the second novel, I think, but it starts with the current reality tree, and I found it particularly interesting. The first novel is, of course, as you probably know better than me, The Goal, which is a manufacturing context, and talks about the 5 focusing steps and some of the key beliefs from the theory of constraints, such as there's generally one root cause, but not always. So It's Not Luck is a lovely starting point, particularly given what we've discussed in this presentation. Beyond the Goal, it's an audiobook, hence 5 hours, available on audible.com, maybe elsewhere, your local retailer. But it's really interesting it covers a lot of ground. The theory of constraints is a system of tools, and it's also the results of those tools being applied in different areas. I can't describe it more clearly without you having a look yourself. But Beyond the Goal covers a lot of the theory in a very compelling way. Eli Goldratt narrates it, and he's extremely clear in how he presents things. If you are a member of OpenCredo, please join me in the Transformation channel, and your friendly neighborhood Simon is always available to you. If you'd like to contact me directly, my email is simon.copsey, Copsey @opencredo.com. Please come say hello. If you find this tool interesting, I'd love to talk to you more over a coffee and support you in your explorations. If you're in the room, I'd probably have feedback caps here and be asking for your feedback on how this went. Again, you can email me if you want on any feedback or any future topics for these lunch and learns that are of use to you, because we love this to be useful to not just our OpenCredo colleagues, but also to the external world. And that's it. Thank you.